What's up, y'all? It's Shuffle, and welcome to the Bounty Hunter Guide. Today we will be covering the strengths, weaknesses, the ways to build Bounty Hunter, what teams you can use to get started, or just give you some creative ideas. And we're going to try something new. I'm going to add kind of a how to play section. I don't know what to call this yet, but I got a comment in the Man-at-Arms Guide that I didn't really go too far into depth on how to explicitly play the character. So I think I might have just got some stuff lost in translation, or I just made some assumptions I shouldn't have, so I will be adding a new how to play section, which will probably be pretty short, but I'm trying to remedy this issue, and we'll work with it as we go, so I hope that it helps you. Before we get started, of course, like, comment, subscribe, all that stupid YouTube garbage. Follow me on Twitch, and join Discord if you have not already. And now let's unironically say, let's get started. Let's actually not bury the lead with the new section, so the how to play part of Bounty Hunter is pretty cut and dry. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of, like, there's some nuance to the character, but really there's two things you're doing. The first is you're putting him in mark teams, or you just run him with his own mark because he can actually set himself up, and you mark something, and that's just a mark debuff on the enemy. They can't resist the mark debuff, so that's pretty cool. And then you have Bounty Hunter, ideally, and other marked people on your team use moves that have bonuses to mark damage, like Collect Bounty and Sniper Shot and all that, and then they hit the person with the mark. So the way the mark functions is like, you put it on them, you're saying, I'm going to do a crap ton of damage to you specifically, and then you blow them up. This is a lot better for bosses than it is for other, like, regular fights, but that's primarily what it's used for. And then the other way to play Bounty Hunter, or at least the other archetype, is to use him as a control and setup type hero. So the easiest way to do this is to use his stun moves and sometimes come hither, because stun disrupts the enemies pretty well, and he has a lot of ways to move enemies. He has 3 different ways, if I remember correctly. And moving enemies into positions they're not good in, so usually backliners to the front and frontliners to the back, causes them to use suboptimal moves. And sometimes there's some enemies that once they get into like rank 1 or rank 4, they can't do anything at that point, and they're just stuck. So moving enemies can actually be more powerful than stunning, but this requires some knowledge on the part of the player on knowing which enemies to put where and how badly they get messed up. Alright, so that's the short and sweet of it, so I'm hoping the rest of that is expanded on in the team section, the skills and all that. So that's just, like I said, this is the first time we're doing it, so I'm working it out along with y'all. And for the strengths of the Bounty Hunter, he's really good at huge, mega big damage. That's primarily why you take him, unless you want to go set up, obviously. But his big damage is very appealing. He's a strong boss killer if he can reach them. And if you understand the boss and the mechanics, and you know Bounty Hunter is going to do work, then you take him, and then he blows stuff up in a few turns. That's pretty nice. His next strength is, my favorite thing about him, is his ability to control. So he has a couple very good stuns. He has 3 different ways to move enemies. And as I was saying before, moving enemies to different positions can often just make them use really crappy moves and be stuck sometimes for the rest of the fight, like the Bone Nobles, Bone Courtiers, whatever they're called, in the Ruins. If you pull one of those to rank 1, they just hit you with a dagger for the rest of the fight. They're stuck. And there are a few other enemies that suffer from this, and that's really nice. The final strength of the Bounty Hunter is his versatile positioning. And this is pretty cool because you can just drop him anywhere in most teams except rank 4, even though you can still do stuff there. But if he's in rank 3, or 2, or 1, he's still doing big damage, he still has at least 1 stun, and then he has like other stuff depending on if he's in 1, 2, or 3. Usually you're sacrificing caltrops, and you're swapping uppercut for flashbang depending on where he's at. But not many characters are this good in different spots. Usually if you put him, like for instance Vestal, even in rank 3 plays vastly different than Vestal in rank 2. That's just one spot on your team, and then her whole playstyle changes. Same with Grave Robber. If she's in rank 4, what she's doing is a lot different than when she's in rank 2. Highwayman is someone that's never out of position, so that just doesn't count because he's unfair. Otherwise, Bounty Hunter can do whatever he wants from most spots on your team. You just have to pick the right skills. Weaknesses for the Bounty Hunter. The first one, and probably most prevalent one, is the fact that if you want the biggest damage numbers out of this character, you need a mark team. Usually when people talk about someone like Grave Robber, they say that she needs a dance team or whatever to accommodate her, which there are some caveats to that, obviously, but with a mark team, you need obviously more people to help synergize the strategy, because the more of it you have, usually the better returns you get. So Bounty Hunter can be a little tough to build around because some of the Mark teams aren't the best, or sometimes they have to make trade-offs. Like, Mark is probably the strategy in this game that if you want to run it, you have to make the most trade-offs in your team. So this can make finding good teammates or good teams for Bounty Hunter a little difficult, and Mark starts to be not as effective against certain enemies, especially if they have multiple actions, because the Marks wear off quicker, but that's, another video. But obviously Mark is an upside in many ways, but it's also a pretty big downside. The other weakness for Bounty Hunter is the fact that Highwayman exists. Highwayman is just a problem character in many ways, and Highwayman doesn't need as much setup or help. He's pretty set in how he does his damage. He just doesn't care what the rest of the team is. He just does the same thing. And the hardest choice for Highwayman is Wicked Slice or Open Vein, which means that Highwayman kind of eclipses a few other characters, or he's just easier to play, easier to drop into teams, which makes it a little less appealing to bring someone like Bounty Hunter or Grave Robber or whoever else. The third weakness for Bounty Hunter is the fact that his moves have some bloat / overlap among them. So he has Come Hither, and then he has Mark for Death, so he has two ways to mark people. He has Flashbang and Come Hither, which are two ways to move backliners. He has Collect Bounty and Finish Him, which are two moves that hit mostly the same ranks, except for Finish Him, which hits rank 3. Which means that because of this, some moves may find favor with a player over others. And even though Bounty Hunter has 7 moves to choose from, you may be finding yourself picking the same 4, or even the same 5, or whatever it is. So that's kind of a crappy part. Usually when you have a character, you like to look at their entire kit and go, you know what, I can find a situation for all of these. And you can still do that with Bounty Hunter, but it's just not as, it doesn't feel like as big of an impact when you make different choices with him. This next weakness comes from Midnight, who has been a great help in helping me write this guide, because it's pretty much a lot of his expertise, because I would consider him a Bounty Hunter expert. But one statement he made when we were discussing the class is that Bounty Hunter wants to be both setup and payoff, which is an interesting thought because, and it's true, it's totally 100% true by the way, but he wants to be the one to move people, he wants to be the one to mark people, but then he also wants to be the one to hit people, which means Bounty Hunter's best ally is often just another Bounty Hunter. So in the case of running multiple Bounty Hunters in a team, do you make one specifically set up? You probably don't, because you want all of them to be able to mark and exploit it and set up and, be payoff. You want them to do all the things. And there's no other character in the game that's actually quite like that. Usually they go, I'm setting up, or I'm dealing damage, or I'm supporting, right? They just pick one archetype, but Bounty Hunter kind of straddles this line of being able to do both and wanting to do both. The final weakness of Bounty Hunter is that his accuracy on Collect Bounty and Finish Him is kind of subpar at 105. So you have to give him some accuracy help. Sometimes you might have to camp him to get him some bonus accuracy from his camp skills, and that's just something to be aware of. Time to talk about the Bounty Hunter's skills, and we're going to start with Collect Bounty. This is your main damage move, especially in a marked team. Obviously that huge 90% damage against marked is massive and awesome. And then the bonus damage against human is actually a pretty good upside. This has the most application in the Wield and the Warrens, where a lot of enemies have human subtype, and then random bandits and such. But if you're running a normal DPS type of, or I should say like DPT, I guess, damage per turn type of team with Bounty Hunter, and you have marks, this is your main attack. Mark for Death is a very interesting move. So marks themselves cannot be resisted. So even if the prot debuff is resisted, the mark itself will stick. And the 120 accuracy is okay. It's a little hard to hit some of the evasive enemies in the game, but this is an interesting move because the mark is the only one that does this, where it gives the person that uses it a boost of speed. So this means that Bounty Hunter, who is very mark reliant, can mark something and then go ahead of them the next turn to guarantee he hits them. That's a really interesting way to do it. So if you don't have huge mark synergy in your team, you can still have Bounty Hunter mark something and then hit it next turn. But the issue is that he's already trading one turn to use mark, and then he's hitting them next turn for like 90% damage, which is almost double damage. And then it's like, if you're just using mark to hit them by yourself with no one else there, it's not that good because you're better off just swinging twice in most cases. Come Hither is something I wish the accuracy was maybe 115 starting or 120, but I kind of understand because that's why the kill list exists. This move has a mark and a pull. The mark only lasts 2 turns, which means using it as a mark tool is a little bit harder, but the chance, or I should say, yeah, the chance to pull someone from 3 to 1, for instance, like a crossbow skeleton, is very powerful because they get, like I've been saying, really bad moves when you displace people. So there are a lot of cases where pulling them is more valuable than the mark on this move. And since the mark does last 2 turns, that does kind of suck. So if you're going to run this move for the pull, that's what you're doing it for. If you're going to run it for the mark, then you should probably run mark for death. Uppercut's a very good move just because you get the chance to knock them back 2 spaces and the stun on top. So there are some frontliners that if you are able to move them from rank 2 to rank 4, for instance, obviously that displaces 3 and 4 as they go back there, and that can like cause some havoc in the enemy team. And then also if you move someone back, like let's say it's a cultist brawler, the dudes with the Wolverine claws, like if you move them back 2 spaces or into rank 4 or something like that, they're stunned for the next turn or the current turn, whatever happens. Then they have to use Stumbling Scratch, and then they have to use Stumbling Scratch again. So there are some times where Uppercut can rob an enemy of 3 turns, and that is very powerful. So if you're running a bounty hunter in the front of your team, then there's almost no reason not to put this on, because even if you're going like hyper damage or whatever, this usually does find use. Flashbang is a more consistent stun than Uppercut, because Uppercut is base 140 and Flashbang is base 150 on the stun chance, which is actually arguably better in a lot of cases just because the higher chance to stun is very nice, and it does no damage when it hits something. And when it hits something, not only does it stun, it has a chance to shuffle, not trying to name drop, but has a chance to shuffle an enemy in the party that gets hit by it. So if you hit like a rank 4, they always come forward if they're going to get moved. If you hit a rank 3, so right here, if the enemy's in this spot on the enemy team, right, it goes like front to back this way. Sometimes they can move back here or up here, so it's random. And then also they can move 1 space or 2 spaces, and I'm not sure if 3 is possible, but even if you get the double space move, that's usually good enough. And the same logic applies to this as to Uppercut, where if you put someone from the back up to the front and they're stunned, they have to waste even more turns just getting back to their optimal position. And honestly, if you stick a nasty Uppercut or like a fantastic Flashbang in a fight and the enemy, gets massively screwed by it, they're done. Like, that is effectively killing them until you have killed the rest of the enemy team. And then once they get back into their position, or sometimes if they're a backliner, they never make it back to the back, then you can find a lot of chances to stall. So whichever position Bounty Hunter's in determines which stun you're taking, and sometimes you could probably run both, but usually you don't need to. Finish Him is interesting because it has overlap with Collect Bounty, but Finish Him has better reach. It can hit rank 3, which is probably the only reason this move is usable, because if it didn't, then everyone would just run Collect Bounty. So hitting that rank 3 is actually very relevant and helpful, but it has a lower crit mod, it has lower damage potential than Collect Bounty, and so if you're packing this, it's usually just to hit rank 3. And the reason I don't like this move too much, besides the reach obviously, is the fact that if I'm stunning enemies, I usually am not trying to kill them quickly. Usually I have to stun them because I have no other choice and have like some threatening move that I'm not trying to deal with. So it's like, if I'm stunning them, why am I trying to get that bonus damage? And so this thing can feel a little awkward at times. I will say though that you can run both of these, and there are plenty of times where even if you're stunning someone and you're stalling that turn, they probably have, a ton of HP or some prot and stuff like that. So wearing them down with this move is still good. It's still a good move. Okay, don't get me wrong. It's just that the overlap with Collect Bounty leaves a little bit to be desired, especially when it's like, if Collect Bounty just hit rank 3 and then Bounty Hunter had a completely different move here, then that would be a lot more interesting in terms of possibilities. Caltrops are sick. I think people sleep on this all the time. The move has a dual benefit, so it has the debuff for damage taken and lowered speed, which means that if this thing sticks to someone, they're not going before anyone next turn. Like, -8 speed at rank 5 is massive, and that 20% bonus damage taken applies to the bleed as well. So if you are stacking this on tough enemies that sit in the back, this thing can shred stuff very quickly. As I say in most videos, I will not spoil, the boss encounters of this game, obviously, but there are quite a few bosses that like to sit in the back, and there are a surprising amount of bosses that this thing can stick to. So if you're sticking this with Bounty Hunter, like you can use Bounty Hunter to do collect bounty and finish him and stun stuff through the entire dungeon, and then he can get to the boss and then just spam caltrops for the entire fight, and it's really effective. It gets even better if the boss has multiple actions per turn, which means the bleed goes from 4 damage to 8, you know, because it ticks twice, or if they have the debuff, it goes up to 5, so it's 10 damage a turn, and that is huge. And the fact that you can keep stacking this to get the more damage taken on top of it means that if you have the right party setup for it, I mean, that's something in all parties for Darkest Dungeon, though. If you have the right setup, things can be really good. But caltrops, I don't know, it's like near and dear to my heart. If you can set up caltrops, it does very well. So I think the more familiar you get with the game, you should probably try a caltrops team at some point, just because it is pretty fun and it's a different way to play Bounty Hunter. Time to look at the Bounty Hunter camp skills. Scout ahead is not the most efficient point per scouting. Trade-off, I think Grave Robbers is more efficient, but this is still great for 3 points, but I'm not generally a fan of 3-point skills because you have to run usually 2 of them just to offset the point difference, otherwise you float like 1 point at the end. But this is okay if you have nothing else. Planned Takedown. This is basically 4 points to kill bosses. The 25% damage is massive. The 15 accuracy fixes his accuracy problem, like I've been saying. And this thing where it says size 2, so that's any large enemy that occupies 2 spaces on the enemy side, but this also applies to any enemy that's bigger than 2. So if there's a boss that's 2 spaces or 3 or even 4, this will apply to them. So it's basically anything that's not just like a tiny or regular sized enemy, and that is a lot of damage. 4 points is pretty fair. If it was 3, it would probably be busted. At 2 points, tracking is actually a pretty fair skill. The percentages are solid. The chance to surprise enemies and then not get surprised yourself, that's a 25-point swing. That's not bad at all. So if you have 2 points and nothing better to do, then it's worth hitting. This is how we do it, as another just hyper carry type of camp skill, and obviously there is some synergy with Planned Takedown. If you plan to run Planned Takedown and this camp skill, you can run both and probably skip accuracy in the dungeon. It's going to be a little scary getting to the boss, but once you have accomplished that and you get to camp, then you're going to have 25 accuracy, 25% damage, and 8% crit for 6 points. That's huge. That's like 3 trinkets slammed together with no downside. And talk about these trinkets, I guess, real quick. But unmovable helmet is pretty nice. The move resist isn't that big a deal, but the move chance at like level 0 and 1, stuff like that, where this is the most applicable. The move chance applying to Come Hither and Flashbang and Uppercut is kind of nice, and being able to stick those moves almost guaranteed at that rank is worth a trinket if you have nothing better. Agility Talon is just 1 speed, 4 dodge. This is fantastic. If you find this, you know, in the early game, then just slap it on. Everyone likes speed, Bounty Hunter's no exception. Camper's Helmet, I think I slept on before, but it's actually pretty good. It's 10 scouting for no downside, and then the stress heal received while camping applies to if you feast and stuff like that. So this is a better trinket than I originally gave it credit for, you know, like a year and a half ago in my tier list video, and I do quite like it. So if you want to have some utility on Bounty Hunter outside of just his stun and move kit, then you put this on and you get 10 scouting, which this is good at like all levels almost. So scouting is usually very beneficial. Hunter's Talon is broken. This is a focus ring with no downside. Well, I shouldn't say no downside. It pretty much is no downside, because the accuracy and crit is obviously massive, and it's flat accuracy and flat crit, so this means that it applies to his range attacks as well as his melee attacks. The 50% food consumed does not apply to hunger checks in hallways. It only applies to camping. So if you camp and you have this on and you feast, for instance, your food that you need for the party goes from 8 to 9, but you can just take this off. So if you're camping, you can take Hunter's Talon, or if it's on, I should say, and you have Hunter's Talon on, you can take Hunter's Talon off, put it into your inventory, and then hit feast, and then put it back on and save yourself the 1 extra food. I'm pretty sure that's not how the game is intended to be played, but you know what? We can do it. And if you forget to do it once you hit camp, you can use the Q and E hotkeys on your keyboard to cycle to Bounty Hunter, and then you can take it off that way before you have to eat food. This trinket is strong enough to be on any Bounty Hunter build at any point in time, including level 6. It is very powerful, and it almost fixes his accuracy issue entirely, and then it gives him 6 crit on top of it, and he loves crit. there is almost no reason ever to not put this on Bounty Hunter if you have one. Wounding Helmet is interesting because at first glance you're like, man, that is a ton of damage. And it is. That is a lot of damage. But then you look at those downsides, and I think the more experience you get with Bounty Hunter, the more you realize this thing is kind of a trap. Because damage isn't too hard to find on Trinkets. Like, Bounty Hunter has a few sources of damage. There are plenty of generic damage variants in the trinket pool for neutral trinkets. And damage doesn't just have to be melee damage, like flat percent damage. Like, accuracy and crit are forms of damage, which is why Hunter's Talent is probably just better than this thing. And to put this on means you have to give up. Like, it's almost required to give up Bounty Hunter's control kit, because even though it's 20% and 25% on stun and move respectively, at champion, like endgame stuff, that is quite a lot, and your stun chances are sitting at like 30-40% on some of the hardy enemies. Like if you're using uppercut, it's 30% against like ghouls. If you're using flashbang, it's 40. If you're against like cove lepers and brawlers and stuff that have 65%, then it's not as detrimental, but it still sucks. It's actually like a lot to give up just for damage, and you can find damage in a lot of sources. So there are times to use this, and those times are very slim, I feel. So make sure that you go, okay, I don't need anything else from Bounty Hunter except to hit as hard as possible, and then you take this. Otherwise, it probably sits in your box. BH has an interesting CC set, Crimson Court set, and the kill list isn't like appetizing at first. The Bag of Teeth is definitely much better, but the kill list does shore up your caltrops and your range attacks and move stuff, so that's kind of nice, and you need it obviously if you want all this flat crit on top of it. But like I said, we're here to talk about the teeth. The kill list is just kind of like a requirement. Crime Lord's Molars, these things are so freaking good. The 10 dodge is not that big of a price to pay, considering how like awesome Focus Ring is, and that's already -8 dodge, so -10 isn't the end of the world. And Bounty Hunter doesn't have like incredible dodge. That's not his defense. Like, he has it, but he's more of like reliant on his pretty hardy HP pool to tank stuff if he gets hit. So that means that these teeth have some pretty fantastic upsides. If you stack all of these, it's 60% increased damage against one target. And just to give you the hard math here, if you run this and you're against someone that's marked and you have the stun and the bleed, like you just have this ridiculous trinity, which means they're probably dead anyway. You get the 60% from stacking all three of these, and then you get the 90% from Collect Bounty. So that's 150% bonus damage on Collect Bounty. That is freaking nuts, dude. In my experience, however, I don't think you should be trying to hit all three of these effects all the time, just because it's kind of tough to land all three, honestly. Because if you have them marked, that's easy enough. If they're bleeding, that's almost easy enough. And then if you have them stunned, it's like they have to get their turn at the right time, so they're stunned on your turn, and then you're hitting them, and that can be a little awkward. And it's definitely not guaranteed, but I think it's pretty easy to reliably hit 2 of these consistently. So if you bring this thing out, this is pretty much 40% damage on Bounty Hunter if you build your team correctly. And then having all this bonus crit on top of it it's good enough. Like, it's definitely applicable. Don't get me wrong. It's good. It's good to have. And if you get to camp and get his accuracies higher from his camp skills, then the CC set is pretty much reading like plus 40% damage, plus 10% crit, plus some goodies for his range attacks and stuff like that. And that's actually nice. Like, if you thought about it that way, would you run 2 trinkets that give you 40% damage and 10% crit? I would. I think that's actually really good. Mask of the Timeless is interesting. It's good. Like, the stats are good. There are characters that would love this. This would be incredibly broken on Plague Doctor. This would be really good on Occultist. This would be great on Antiquarian. There are a lot of characters that would love to have this, and it went to Bounty Hunter. But even then, I think this is still good for Bounty Hunter, just because that is a lot of dodge. That gets him up to 40 baseline. That's pretty solid. 2 speed. Everyone likes speed. I will never not say that in this game. Even Crusader appreciates some speed. So the 2 speed is really great. And then the 5 stress is a very minimal downside. It's like +1 stress on everything that stresses you, which, in hallways and stuff that can add up, but otherwise it's good. It's really good. And I think the best way to use this isn't for hyper carry Bounty Hunter where you're just trying to blow stuff up with the axe. I think this is best on Control Bounty Hunter. So if you're running a lot of stuns and a lot of like movement effects, Then this gets a little bit better because if Bounty Hunter can initiate in fights and hit his stuns and movements early, that's a lot better for your team. So I think if you're running a control Bounty Hunter, this gets a lot better. If you're running a damage Bounty Hunter, this is okay, but it's not, it's not the best. You'd probably take something else. For Bounty Hunter quirks, no surprise, you just want whatever damage you can squeeze out of them. So Slugger, Precise Striker, maybe even Deadly. Natural Swing for some accuracy is pretty nice. And if you are really focused on trying to complete the game, then Eldritch Killers like Eldritch Hater and Slayer are very good to lock in on him because he is a damage monster, and Eldritch is the most common subtype of enemies. So being able to have a consistent and very strong bonus against them is helpful. Next set of quirks, Speed. Like I said, everyone likes speed, so Luminous, Quick Reflexes, those are fantastic. Unlike other builds where I suggest defensive quirks, like if you have nothing better and too much money, you could probably drop one on Bounty Hunter, but honestly it's not needed. He has enough stuns and damage in his kit that usually he's able to mitigate whatever threats are coming at him, either by killing them outright or stunning them. Our first team is going to be an update for Marked for Death. I covered this team in the Arbalest guide, and I just took the stock one that came off the wiki that has the name and stuff like that. But when I was talking to Midnight, and Thick also plays this team, and Midnight suggested it, and I was thinking that Jester has some anti-synergy a little bit on this team because Arbalest doesn't really need accuracy. She kind of likes the crit, and then the speed on the whole team is nice, but, not required. And then I started thinking about, too, like, Marked for Death, one of the issues I always think of, like subconsciously maybe with that team, is that it's just really slow. Or it's not like super slow, but all the people on it are like average speed. So this actually fixes a lot of issues, and I think it's just a lot better. It's surprising, so let's explore it here. The Bounty Hunter, starting with him, like I guess I should focus on the highlighted character, even though I'd like to go left to right or right to left. But the Bounty Hunter is going to be using Collect Bounty primarily as the damage move. We have a lot of Mark synergy on this team, so this is kind of a no-brainer. Marked for Death, if Bounty Hunter goes before Arbalest and Occultist had to stun something or whatever happens, this is just great to have. This lets Bounty Hunter go back-to-back, or I shouldn't say back-to-back, but this lets him go early the next turn too if he wants to hit the same mark target. And also it reduces protection, which protection does suck and it does hinder mark teams. So you have this. Uppercut can be flashbang if you really want it. If you plan to run Dirk Stab on Jester, then you can't use Uppercut in the turns that Jester is in front of him. But otherwise, this is very nice to disrupt the enemy team, move people back. But like I said, this could be flashbang and it's still just as good. I just think that having the backline hate of Arbalest, who can just, shoot and nuke backliners, that Uppercut gets a little bit better. And in the end game, when you're out of backline targets, you can hit Uppercut and Hands from the Abyss, and then you can stall. Finish Him is here for the coverage, just to be able to reach rank 3, and since we do have access to stuns on this team, and then you have these situations where Bounty Hunter can stun something, if you like low roll speed and then you high roll speed next time, then you can hit the same targets. But having Finish Him is primarily here for the reach, and it is nice to synergize, like I said, with Occultist. For Trinkets, since this is like a hyper, not quite hyper, but like a pretty aggro strat for Bounty Hunter, we're going to focus on damage. The Hunter's Talon is just Focus Ring, but better, and Hunter's Talon is amazing, and you can get it sooner, so if you find it, definitely throw it on. Otherwise, this could be Surgical Gloves or anything else that boosts damage and gives you primarily crit. You're not looking for accuracy as much, though Bounty Hunter at 105 does kind of want it, and this helps him secure both things. Otherwise, any form of damage is good. This is a build where you can actually pull off all 60% of the Crime Lord's molars, and it is incredible as a feeling. So I was testing this team, and I was just running it how I would normally run it, stunning and marking high priority targets. And then a couple times, I would run into situations and fights where I'm like, oh, rank 2 is bleeding, and they're stunned, and they're marked, so I'm getting full value. And then you crit them for like 81 damage with Collect Bounty, and it's nuts. So you can easily hit 2 of the 3 bonuses, and you can actually hit all 3 if you do a little bit of planning, and it's a little bit easier than you would think. So the molars do pull a lot of weights. Again, of course, this can be any form of damage. This can be probably not something at lower speed because you want Bounty Hunter to beat Arbalest in speed most of the time. So you can use like Ancestor Candle, you can use Ancestor's Pen. You can use, like the little Warrior Bracer or whatever that does 10% melee damage. There are a lot of options here, so just look for anything that gives you damage. Occultist is pretty fun to play on this team. I'm sure there's some newer players that aren't used to Occultist being in the front, but this is actually his best spot. Is maybe not rank 1, but rank 2 is probably his best spot. So having this really strong offense facilitator, coupled with Bounty Hunter, who's a pretty good facilitator as well, means that you have a very efficient team in terms of offense, and Occultist is flexible, so don't think that these 4 moves are explicitly what you need, but they are probably his most consistent. Starting with the main draw of this build, it's Hands from the Abyss. This stun is nuts. It's probably the best stun in the game, just because like Occultist can get a stun chance so mega high, and the 110 accuracy is pretty nice. The crit mod is huge, so this thing will crit all the time, and if it's critting and you're getting minus stress and more chance to stun because you get 20% extra stun chance by critting, this is going to feel just fantastic, and you're going to notice how powerful it is, especially with Trinkets. Also make sure you bring a couple extra torches because Occultist will nuke your torch. Hex is another move that for some reason crits all the time because it has a crit modifier, so that's pretty nice, and Occultist is getting, more stress healing by critting. Otherwise, this is here just to mark targets. The dodge debuff isn't a huge deal with Jester, but being able to get a fast mark out on Occultist does facilitate the offense quite a bit, and if you get your turns in an order where it's more favorable to use the mark on Occultist, then Bounty Hunter can uppercut or something like that, so it gives you a lot of flexibility, and I think it's a good one to have. Weird Reconstruction should be on every Occultist build just because it's a heal you can use from anywhere. The bleed chance doesn't matter that much at endgame, and being able to heal for big numbers is pretty nice, and it's not as good in the vacuum because you don't have Man-at-Arms to funnel damage to one person, but it's good. It's still a good heal. Weakening Curse is the flex pick. It's another move like Hex that crits quite frequently because of its massive crit modifier, and it sticks more consistently because it's critting all the time. So having the ability to lower damage from hard hitters means it's kind of like reverse healing, where instead of hitting you for, I don't know, like 15, they hit you for 12, which is nice, and if you stack it twice, they hit you for far less. And this does pretty well against a lot of bosses that have like just raw, hard-hitting attacks. But you can absolutely switch this for Sacrificial Stab, and I would still recommend Curse just because the ability to lower protection from a second source that's not marked for death really does help this team because it's more or less all on-hit damage. There's only like one source of bleed, so being able to lower protection means this team gets through fights a little bit quicker. With Trinkets, you ideally want at least one of these for Stun Bot Occultist. If you can get both, that's just even better. Vial of Sand is great because it facilitates all of Occultist's offense. So if you want to run any of his disruptive moves or his debuffs or his stun, he's got you. There's no downside. Vial of Sand is nuts, so if you find it, definitely use that. Demon's Cauldron further helps the debuffing and stun chance by pushing it to massive levels. So between two trinkets, we have plus 50% stun chance, and plus the 150 base, that's 200. And if you crit, which Occultist will be doing all the time, you have 220% chance to stun, which means that Occultist can double stun stuff and sometimes even triple stun if they have very low stun resist baseline, and that's nuts. That's absolutely disgusting. The Cauldron also comes with the added benefit of more crit chance, which means all of his stuff is stress healing. Hands from the Abyss is critting for sometimes 10, which is really nice, and you're stress healing constantly. So just be aware that you probably won't go Virtuous if you have this on, but honestly, there's so many upsides, it's worth it. Jester is the interesting one because, like I said before, I didn't think he would fit in this team that well, but he actually fits very well, and it's surprising. So he does all of his support stuff, and then he has access to damage if you want it, and you can still run a very traditional build on Jester. I'm just exploring something different, so don't be weirded out that this is kind of like a weird, I said weird twice, but don't be confused like why there's a different set of skills and odd trinket choices. I'll explain them, right? So let's get started. The Dirk Stab, you don't need this. This is your most flexible move to have. I have this just in case, like, I want to finale or if I need to move Jester out of rank 4, so I think it's okay there. But otherwise, this is very flexible. Harvest, this could be sliced off depending on where you're going or what you're up against. But this sets up bleed, so the teeth have another source of damage, or damage bonus, I should say. So you can run one bleed or both of them, but I like Harvest in most cases unless I'm against the boss. Finale, you don't need this either, so you could actually trade one of these out, or both Dirk Stab and Finale, and get different stuff. You could run both bleeds and the Stress Heal, and Stress Heal is probably the thing you want to put on if you're not going to run a different move, but having the ability to use Battle Ballad, and then Dirk Stab, and then Finale as like your first 3 turns, something's dead in most cases, and that helps close out fights quickly, and you don't need to Stress Heal as much if you're ending fights faster. Then we come to Ballad, which is the absolutely most broken skill probably in the entire game. Definitely the most broken skill in Jester. And hitting this once fixes the accuracy issues of Bounty Hunter, and it also fixes Occultist, who has kind of bad accuracies if you're not using, or if you are using Sacrificial Stab, then this gets a lot better for him too. But giving your entire team speed, which is what Mark teams desperately want in a lot of cases so they can set up and kill things faster, giving them crit helps their damage immensely, not just for the, flat crit damage that they get, but also a lot of the Mark teams have bonus damage against Mark, or like they get bonus damage for critting, so giving them more crits translates into much more damage. It scales very quickly. So Ballad is probably no surprise, and it's always your opening turn. For the trinkets, we're going to explore some different stuff. I think Feather Crystal is really good on Jester. This could be some other high-level speed trinket, obviously. You're not like forced into this, but you can get Feather Crystal somewhat early, so I think it's a good one to put on at most levels. Even at level 6, it's still pretty good. So obviously Jester wants to go first, Jester wants to Ballad, Jester wants to set up and do everything he wants to do, and then his best defense is dodge, and this helps him with both of those. Barristan's Head is the interesting one. I think Nick was the first person I saw this from in the Darkest Dungeon Discord. He's definitely been a proponent of it in my own Discord, but I can't remember who I first saw it from. I'm pretty sure it's Nick, but anyway. Barristan's Head on Jester, surprisingly good. And the reason is Jester's low HP pool, and dodge is a good defensive stat, but it's inconsistent, and protection is highly consistent. So giving him a mix of both, or giving him this, especially at low level when you can't find Feather Crystal, you can find Barristan's Head very quickly in the game, and giving him this is actually really nice. The more I play with it, the more I have been greatly enjoying it. The stress downside is important, so if you run this, you probably want Inspiring Tune, but if you can afford to play around it, it makes Jester much more durable, and you don't have to worry about him as much, because without it, if Jester isn't dodging, he gets hit twice, he's probably a Death's Door or very close to it, and that's scary. So this gives him pretty much an extra hit, sometimes 2, and it shaves off a lot of damage, even from those attacks that do like 1 or 2, and it's awesome. So if you've not tried Barristan's Head on Jester, I would recommend it. Arbalest is here to be your hyper carry, so you give her as much damage as possible. You give her 2 people that are fast to drop marks, and then she shoots backlines, and then spends the rest of the turns, or the rest of the fight healing, especially because Bounty Hunter can clean up the front, and that's fantastic. So we're going to start with Sniper Shot, big damage, no surprise, set mark with Occultist or Bounty Hunter, like that is your priority, and then she shoots, hopefully they die, hopefully she crits, so she gets bonus damage for turn 2. Sniper's Mark making an appearance because I don't think Blind Fire fits too well. You could run Bola, you can also run Suppressing Fire, but honestly you're trying to kill things, not slow them down. So Sniper's Mark is nice because sometimes you hit these situations where if you want to set up the teeth, for instance, so like Jester harvested the turn before, Occultist stuns next turn, or at least that's what you're thinking of, and then you can Sniper Mark the same person, so you have all 3 up at the same time. That's usually how I get this to work, or I should say this is how I get the teeth to work, is I use Sniper's Mark. So that is really nice, and Sniper's Mark does find some use, even though it may not at first glance. Bandage is awesome. This really helps out Occultist because sometimes his healing is, I shouldn't say sometimes, his healing is always inconsistent, but giving him more healing buffs, so healing received, and the chance to keep people off Death's Door with a second character is great, and Occultist definitely appreciates that. Flare is here for its sheer utility, but this could be Blind Fire, this could be Bola, this could be something else if you really want to, but I think Flare is still a pretty good move, and I always like to have it just in case of like those random occurrences where someone gets stunned when I don't want them to, or if there's Mark and there's a lot of damage coming in, especially because I lost someone recently in the Warrens because of Mark's energy, so I'm a little more hyper aware of it than I used to be, and Flare is just all around a good move. With the trinkets, we're going full offense, so if you can afford Keening Bolts, these are best in slot. These are just like unmitigated, oppressive damage, and it actually almost makes Arbalest a good character. So these are just fantastic. The downside is pretty negligible because you're going to be critting and killing all the time. The musket ball is probably the most flexible here. This could be some other form of damage, or I don't know, like bracer or utility. I wouldn't go utility though, just because you're trying to go as much damage as possible, and having this amount of crit is very nice. I would avoid the fuse stick from the Matchman. I don't think that's good on Arbalest. If you are trying to go heavy mark synergy, you want her to be slower and not faster. Otherwise, any form of primarily crit is probably what you're looking for, is best to pair up with Keening Bolts. This team is really straightforward in terms of how it operates. So turn 1, Jester is hitting Battle Ballad like every single time. This team needs the speed, it needs the crit, it needs a little bit of accuracy, but it's just, you know, kill things faster is never bad. And then, depending on who goes next, if Bounty Hunter goes second, or sometimes first, you know, depending on speed rolls, but if Bounty Hunter goes before Occultist, Bounty Hunter has to mark. And that is because Arbalest needs to have that insurance that someone has a mark set for her. And then if Occultist goes after Bounty Hunter, then you're stunning. Or sometimes, if the fight calls for it, you might just go, yeah, I'm not really worried about the frontliners, so you mark the other target so you don't have to the next turn. But I would still mark on turn 1 or 2 with Occultist if you don't have to set a mark, or maybe you have to heal from the previous fight. But Occultist is pretty much just hitting mark on the first or second target, and then he's stunning for the rest of the fight, and then sometimes he drops a heal if he has to. But otherwise, you really, really want to hit that stun as often as possible, because stunning frontliners means you're not taking damage, which means you don't have to heal, and being proactive in this game is much better than being reactive. I was kind of talking about Occultist and Bounty Hunter together, but I went off into Occultist territory. So Bounty Hunter is, like I said, if he goes before Occultist, he marks, or sometimes he may mark a frontliner that has prot just to set himself up for the next turn. But usually I would like to open with a stun if I don't have to mark, and then probably turn 2 is when you mark with Bounty Hunter, or you're trying to kill something, or you're cleaning up rank 3, and then you have mark from Occultist after that to set him up for the rest of the fight. Or sometimes, like I said, he marks with himself. So I know you're kind of looking for a couple different things, but like I said, with experience, you'll get it. Once Arbalest has killed the 2 backline enemies, she's going to be shifting to a healing role just to keep people's HP topped off, which means that Bounty Hunter is spending turns 3, 4, 5, stuff like that, closing out the fight. So he is hitting Collect Bounty on targets that are set up for him. And if you need to stall at the end of the fight, then he is using one of his stuns, actually probably Uppercut. I shouldn't say one of his stuns, it is Uppercut. So at the end of the fight, if you have Uppercut on, that's what he's hitting to slow down the fight after he kills someone else with Collect Bounty. So you stun someone, you're using your healing moves, and you're just trying to slowly close out the fight even though you have a lot of burst damage, which means you have more chances to stall and recover HP. Arbalest is hitting Sniper Shot on turn 1 and 2 every single time. Like, the only time you don't is if there's someone on Death's Door that you have to heal off with bandage. So you are just hitting Sniper Shot on the biggest stress caster, then you're hitting Sniper Shot on the other backliner, and then you're hitting maybe Sniper's Mark or heals for the rest of the fight depending on how in danger you are. Because if you don't need to heal, then you Sniper's Mark rank 2, and then you heal after that. Otherwise, Arbalest is the easiest character to play because she's literally just shoot stuff until she can't shoot anything anymore. This team started with the idea of giving Leper some love, as well as trying to highlight Come Hither specifically, and it actually works. It has some mark synergy, and the Vessel's there for consistency, but she's pretty flexible, as is Houndmaster. But the main draw of this team is the Bounty Hunter and Leper, so we're going to take a look at them right now. For Bounty Hunter, his offensive quirks don't matter too much, they are nice to have, but it's mostly the move loadout that's very important here. So we have Collect Bounty, and that's just to get mark damage and mark synergy and all that, hits really hard. We have Mark for Death because once we run out of backline things to hook, then we have to be able to mark them when they're up front still, so this helps us do that, and it's also just good damage because of the minus prot and the bonus speed. Well, the bonus speed translates to damage, you know, because Bounty Hunter goes first, takes turns off the board, yada yada yada, yada. Anyway, Come Hither. This is the main draw of this build. This is used to pull people from the back and mark them. The issue with Come Hither is that the mark doesn't last that long. It only lasts like 2 turns. So it's not great, especially if they go after you hook them. So you hook them, they get a turn, sometimes they move back, and then they have one more turn of mark. But if you understand the enemies and their movesets and which ones can move back, or how they like to move, or how far they can move and stuff like that, this can actually be very good. And if Bounty Hunter is slow enough to hook them, where like they get their first turn, then Bounty Hunter hooks them, Leper usually goes pretty consistently like right after that. So you can hook him, and then he just erases them. And it's pretty cool, and like once it starts going, it's actually really fun to do. So Come Hither is the complete foundation for this setup, and it should be what you're striving for. Uppercut is here because if Bounty Hunter's up front, then this is a great stun tool. It also helps to disrupt enemies. Like if you hook someone and then Leper doesn't finish them and they move back a space afterwards, you can uppercut a frontliner behind them and push them back up, so you don't have to hook them a second time, and you get some like bigger tempo swings that way. So uppercut's just a really good stun. This could be flashbang if you run Bounty Hunter in rank 3, but I usually run Bounty Hunter in rank 2 for this team. For Trinkets, we're going to use the Ancestor's Candle. This is just so Bounty Hunter can consistently go first if we're playing in a solidly high torch level. And also the bonus damage is kind of nice because it does give like an extra point to Come Hither and all that. So really cool. Extra dodge, nice. Plus stress, not a big deal. The kill list though. The kill list making an appearance, and we're not using Caltrops, although you could. You could certainly use Caltrops here. I think it's a bit overkill to use Caltrops and Come Hither, like to set that up. Unless you're fighting some kind of super tanky backline enemy like a Skyver, or I have no idea what else, like a boss. But like what boss can you Caltrops and hook, or like what boss do you want to Caltrops and hook? I'm not quite sure off the top of my head. I'd have to think about it. Otherwise, this is very helpful to this build. It gives Bounty Hunters Come Hither, which is 110 base accuracy, is not great, especially against evasive backliners. So this makes it very consistent in terms of hitting. Then also the massive 50% move chance. That puts up to 190. You're pulling pretty much everything at that point. Like, it has to be a Swinatar or something that does not get pulled by this. So it's really nice, and it's nice to show off the other side of kill list, because it is really good with Caltrops, but it's nice to also use Come Hither. In this build, Leper is really just a one-button class. It's like literally chop, and sometimes you can hew. You don't really need hew, but it's there. This could be anything else. This could be purge, withstand, revenge, depending on what you're going to, but chop is pretty much the only attack button you're hitting most of the time. But we have hew anyway, just to give them something different. Like sometimes some enemies sitting up there at 5 HP, and so it's like you don't want to overkill by 25, so it's nice to just cleave it down and get some other damage in. We have Solemnity, because this is a very solid heal, and Leper's self-sufficiency is one of his best characteristics, and giving him Solemnity, which is probably the best like self-heal a character can get in the game, like making sure he has that on is just never bad. Intimidate is here just to give Leper some backline sniping power, and also de-stealthing and all that. So it's a solid move. It kind of feels weird because with Leper you want to just hit stuff as hard as possible every turn, but Intimidate is kind of like a finesse move where the more you use it and the better you understand it, the more applicable it gets. And it is really good against certain enemies and in certain encounters. Like there are some enemies that if you just hit them with this twice and it's 6, they're just doing nothing, and it's awesome. But most of the time you're going to be hitting chop. So if you really feel like you're just not using this, then you could swap it out. But I think Hew is a better like first target candidate. Since we do not have Jester, our Trinkets have to really give us a lot of accuracy. So we're starting with the Focus Ring. I should just do Tassel first, but whatever. Focus Ring is just a massive amount of accuracy, massive amount of crit. Those are both nice. Leper does very well with crit, since his base crit's actually pretty like low considerably, or considering other characters. Like Chop at max rank has like +7, and he's got only base 5, so his crit rate's actually very low. It's kind of like Vestal in that regard. Her crit rate's really low, but that's why she's not a great damage dealer unless you really put a lot of effort into her. And Leper, he has a really high base damage at 13 to 26, so giving him extra crit to really maximize his huge damage roll is more welcome than flat damage in most cases. I have to crunch the numbers a little bit more, but like obviously the percentage damage on Leper scales much harder for him, but crit, like with how variable his crit rate or his damage range is from 13 to 26, that means that giving him crit, which always guarantees a max roll of damage, is probably better in most cases. So I do focus on crit. I spent too long talking about that. The minus dodge he doesn't really care about because he's just a thick boy. Wolf's Tassel is the entire point of this team besides Bounty Hunter and Come Hither. So this is just bonus accuracy if they're marked, massive damage if they're marked, also some bonus crit against beefy size 2 people, which are usually frontliners. Sometimes there's like Swinotar. So this was, like I said, the basis of the team. I was thinking like I could use Come Hither, and then I can use Wolf's Tassel and Leper. Alright, let's try it. And it actually works pretty well. This is definitely a late game setup because of how you get Wolf's Tassel, but once you get it, I would suggest giving this team a try. Houndmaster is a flex pick on this team. This could be another Bounty Hunter or some other support unit. Like the core of this team is just Bounty Hunter and Leper. So everyone else is pretty flexible if you can find a reason to put them in. But I think Houndmaster adds some consistency and some reach, which this team does need, so I do like using him here. And for moves, we're going to rock the Hound's Rush. This is just to get mark synergy, and also bleed damage is pretty nice. And, you know, it helps finish off enemies at low health that get away with 2 HP and they're bleeding out, so that's pretty nice. It's just a solid move all around. We have Hound's Harry, which is a massive cleave. If you plan to run the Crimson Court set, then this move gets a little bit better. If you plan to run some high speed stuff for Houndmaster like Ancestor's Pistol or Matchstick, and he high rolls the Bounty Hunter in speed, then this is something you can do while you're waiting for marks, or you can mark yourself if you really wanted to. But this move isn't bad just to, again, snipe people at low health, because Leper hits really hard, and as hard as he hits, sometimes people do get away at like 2 HP or like 5 HP, so being able to clean them up while doing other stuff is pretty nice. So I do like the idea of cleaves or damage over time to supplement Leper's massive single target damage. Target Whistle is the best mark in the game, don't at me. The 120 base accuracy is pretty common for marks, but that massive 170 base debuff chance, this is why you take this move. The 30 prot's nice, it would still be good at 15 prot. It's the fact that it's 170 base chance to lower their protection on the debuff chance that makes it so good. This thing has like a built-in debuff amulet, which is why it's so freaking busted. So if you're gonna run a mark synergy team, and especially like Leper who struggles against protection, then this move is pretty, I don't want to say mandatory, but it's as close to mandatory as you can get. This also sets up Bounty Hunter on subsequent turns. If you like, you know, use Come Hither, Leper erases something, and then you want to set up Bounty Hunter for next turn because you're out of backline targets, then you just drop Target Whistle if the Houndmaster high rolls speed. This also helps Leper, especially if it's like a size 2 bone command or something like that, because this team is Ruins viable, even though most things are Ruins viable, but you get my meaning. You know, Uka Crabs, they also fall into this. It's just a really good move to have. Cry Havoc is not mandatory, like, at all. There's even a case to switch the positioning of, what is it, the Houndmaster and Bounty Hunter, so you can use Blackjack. That's very strong. The guards, also okay. Lick Wounds, I mean, you have Vessel, you shouldn't need this, and then you have Blackjack, which, like I just said, is a really good stun. So your fourth move is pretty flexible, but I like this core of 3. The Crimson Court set may seem a bit out of place, and I hope you stick with me on this one. I will try and justify my reasoning, but the Evidence of Corruption as a standalone trinket is incredible. It's right up there with Ancestor's Map in terms of like just sheer effectiveness. You know, you trade Trap Disarm, which Houndmaster doesn't need, for Surprise Chance, which is, you know, awesome. So this is really good to have. And the other thing that Houndmaster kind of struggles with is his bad accuracy. 105 accuracy is pretty low. So the reason we have the entire CC set is because this gives him an extra 15 accuracy, and then it boosts his camp skills and stuff. So if you do those medium and long missions, his stress healing gets just that much better. And this fixes his accuracy for the most part. And if you just happen to have bleeding targets, then it's a massive damage boost. Which means if you run this and Houndmaster happens to high roll speed, it's not a bad idea to open with like a Hound's Harry. Or if you want to double tap someone with Hound's Rush, that's also good, while Leper kills someone else. And you just get a lot of effective damage and some bonus crit. So it will find use. If you want to run Caltrops with Bounty Hunter, then it gets just that much better. But for the most part, this is a mark team, so you don't have to use the Crimson Court set. So if you are not going to use it, I would recommend something that gives accuracy, like Steady Bracer or Ancestor's Pistol, and then any other source of damage you can find, especially if it can like lower your speed. So Legendary Bracer is nice because that lets bounty hunters set up like everyone at that point. So you are pretty flexible here. You don't need the CC set. I just think that it fills a lot of utility roles for Houndmaster, and Leper is more than good enough to carry the damage load for the entire team. It's another day, another Vestal, same loadout, pretty much same thing here. So there's just the best healing setup. The map is just fantastic utility. It gives her a bunch of scouting. If you have the CC set, this is 75% scout chance before any other modifiers, which is awesome. So you have this, trap disarm if you want to get her some stress off by having her disarm traps, that's a thing. And then your other trinket is probably something for healing. I like the Salacious Diary, but again, CC trinkets aren't guaranteed, so Tome of Holy Healing is a solid replacement. I like it slightly more than Sacred Scroll. I need to talk about Sacred Scroll in a different video, but this is good enough. But if you have Chirurgeons, that's also fine. Just anything that gives healing, Junia's Head, not as good with the map because that's 30% stress at that point, but you could use it if you swap this out for something else. Otherwise, just anything that gives you healing and then like some kind of utility, either scouting or stun chance, is just fine for Vestal. As long as Bounty Hunter has like 4 or 5 more speed than Leper, you'll find this team is pretty fun and simple in terms of usage. It's literally just come hither, any available backliner, Leper deletes them, you do it a second time, Leper deletes them, and then at that point you have 2 enemies on turn 3, ideally, hopefully, and then you can slow it down and try and stall the heal. Houndmaster can double tap someone and pick people off. There's just some really good damage that can come out of this team because Leper's big weakness is he can't hit backline enemies, and you just give him backline enemies. There's that same synergy with Occultist, but Occultist doesn't mark. But otherwise, I am a pretty big fan of having anyone that can pull enemies up to Leper, and then he can just delete them. So your turn 1 and 2 is come hither and chop usually, and then Houndmaster's just doing whatever he needs to help the team, so that's like Hound's Rush, double tap on someone, or a target whistle to set up a mark on like turn 2. That's actually not an uncommon thing for this team to do, where maybe Houndmaster is setting up another enemy, he hits someone or double taps them, then like turn 3 he can mark. But otherwise, you know, if you are using come hither and Leper kills someone, then you're going, okay, I have like this big 2 space like Bone Commander or something like that, and I'd rather just set up Bounty Hunter by using target whistle. So after that, then we have this massive 30% prot drop, and then all 3 of them get to hit that target, and it's usually dead at that point. Then you have Vestal, who's just dropping a stun on turn 1, and then healing is needed. She can also use Judgment to help Houndmaster close out kills, or help Leper close out kills. It's honestly pretty fun. I like playing this team. It's very simple, but it's fun to use some kind of movement disruption mechanic, and then watch Leper just succeed. Like, you're just a proud parent pushing Leper on their bike as the training wheels come off and stuff, and it's like, I'm really doing it. It's like, yay. So that's kind of the feeling of this team. Just watch out for stealth enemies. So there are the pink fish in the cove. They like to start out stealth. There's some stealth enemies in the Warrens, and I think crones in the Weald are also stealth. So there are some enemies that give this team a bit of trouble, and also Leper hates getting moved out of position. So if you're going to take him to the Weald, make sure that, I don't know, you hope you don't run into giants, or maybe you replace Houndmaster for someone that can be a little more mobile to help fix positioning. But as far as the other zones go, this team should do just fine. Even with Houndmaster, who is bleed-centric, if you have Mark synergy, he should do more than enough damage that the bleeds from his things, like if they don't stick on skeletons, it doesn't matter. This last team was another one of Midnight's ideas, and it focuses primarily on cleaving down the backline over the first couple turns, and then it has a lot of recovery potential for the end of the fight, and it has some good stalling between the various stuns that you can employ. So it's actually pretty cool, and it does pretty well against some bosses that sit in the back. So let's take a look at it. Starting with Caltrops, this is the star of the show. Caltrops are here to help either PD or Flagellants get their damage rolling even harder on specific targets. You can focus fire the same target with Caltrops like 3 times or 2 times or whatever, or you can split it up between, 1 and 2. If you're facing a boss that sits on the back, this gets a lot better, and it's just a really fun move to use, and the damage taken debuff that it has also applies to damage over time, so this can ramp up very quickly, and it's really cool in that way. Plus the -8 speed makes sure that no one that gets hit by caltrops are going before your team. This team is actually kind of fast, with the exception of Crusader. The other 3 heroes are like fast enough to where they can dictate the battle, and PD, if she can go first, usually dictates the entire fight because she can just slow it down and stun whoever she's looking for besides rank 1. Being able to use caltrops and help further the damage over time while you're stunning stuff is really fun and cool to see. Finish him is here over collect bounty because of the reach, but also this team does have a few different ways to stun enemies, so this makes more sense than collect bounty, which won't find as many uses, though there are times to use collect bounty because if you're going into like the Wield or the Warrens where there are a good amount of human subtypes, then that damage bonus is relevant, but I still think Finish Him is just slightly better. We have Flashbang because we cannot use Uppercut in rank 3. Flashbang is just a high value stun. You don't need to Trinket for it, although it is kind of nice to do it, and it's just good. We have to use Come Hither. I should probably mouse over to it. So we have to use Come Hither because sometimes we don't want to stun something. We'd rather just pull it out of position, and Flashbang is not reliable for pulling people exactly where you want them, where Come Hither is. So there are some enemies that once they're in rank 3, if you pull them up to rank 1, they just do nothing. Like for 1 turn, sometimes like for the rest of the fight, you know, like Pelagic Shaman, just stab you with a gold dagger once they're in rank 1. So being able to do that consistently is great. Otherwise, you're not usually looking to move people. You're just spending the first couple turns hitting caltrops, and then after that, it's Finish Him for the next like 3 turns while you're wrapping up the fight and healing. Kill is making a comeback, so we're going to rock both caltrops and Come Hither, which means this gets double value. Mega awesome, super cool. Hunter's Talon's here for a couple reasons. The first is, it is nice to have more accuracy just to make sure that these range moves get up to, I think it's 135? Right, so we have 25, so 135 on these. That's pretty cool. And also the crit modifier for Hunter's Talon is very relevant to both Come Hither and caltrops. It's more there for caltrops, because caltrops with the crit bonus and caltrops already has a pretty good crit modifier on its own. So getting this even higher, so plus 15% just from the skill and the trinket, is very relevant because being able to stick that debuff consistently with Hunter's Talon crits, because it will crit a fair amount of times, so being able to stick that consistently is more important than the bleed. The bleed's nice, but sticking that debuff is why you're primarily using caltrops in this build. So if you don't want to run a debuff amulet and you want to have something slightly more, I don't want to say, I guess it is higher tempo, so if you want to run something a little faster as an item, then just giving yourself more offense is better than just giving yourself plus debuff chance. Like I was saying before, there are some bosses that if you just spam caltrops on them, they drop. I'm gonna go in a weird order for the skills here, or not skills, for the characters. So next we'll talk about PD. So for Plague Doctor, I think this is a pretty standard loadout. You can swap whatever you feel fit, because sometimes you might want medicine, sometimes you might want... Actually, you don't need vapors, honestly. And you don't need incision. So it's really just what do you want to swap out for medicine. And there are cases for a couple of these moves. Probably not Plague Grenade, so it might be disorienting. It's probably disorienting, honestly. So I guess we solved that puzzle. Anyway, so we have Noxious Blast. This is just good frontline damage plus the minus accuracy, which is pretty cool. We have Plague Grenade. When comboed with Rain of Sorrows and caltrops, this is going to be a ton of damage very quickly, even though it's all damage over time. The fact that you're ramping it and stunning them in between means that you're safely taking down backlines, which are oftentimes the most threatening set of enemies. So very nice and reliable way to do it there. Also very safe. This gets even safer when we use Blinding Gas, which you only get 3 shots of it. So if you're not fighting a boss, 3 of these is plenty. You probably don't need more than 2. And most times you're probably just using 1. Like, if I can be quite honest, you're probably hitting this 1 time while you get everyone else set up. And then after that, it's just like Plague Grenade once or twice. And then the fight, well, I shouldn't say the fight's over, but the backline's gone at that point. So that's usually by the end of turn 3. And we have Disorienting Blast because getting rid of corpses can help sometimes, depending on if people move around or if you're fighting mobile enemies. But also having a stun that can hit rank 2 reliably with Plague Doctor is fantastic. So it's here. But like I said, this could be battlefield medicine if you feel that you need more consistency and safety from PD who can easily support the team. With Trinkets, I usually try and show players different builds they can use at like all levels. But Blasphemous Vial is such a powerful trinket that it is class defining. Like, this character does not take off until you put this on her. So if you want to get the most of Plague Doctor, I would suggest for any player, you know, new or veteran or whatever, if you want to use Plague Doctor, wait until you see the boss drop for the week. You know, like if you get a boss, they always drop a orange trinket. So just wait for the vial. If you see the vial, then go in, try and get the boss, try and get this as early as possible, because it makes Plague Doctor such a powerful character if you can get this early enough. It even makes her good later, obviously, but it's nice if you can pick it up early. I can't really suggest anything to replace this because it's such an all-in-one trinket that makes PD a fantastic character. Like, she's already good, but it makes her even better. So I would say try and get this as soon as possible because it is very important to have. That's before I even talk about the stats. The 10 accuracy helps her stick all of her stuff. Her accuracies are pretty good. Baseline at 115, but she needs just a little bit more to hit those evasive people. The 20% stun chance is fantastic. The the blight skill chance is fantastic, and that 25% stress is pretty massive. But we do have Crusader on the team who can stress heal, and we also have Flagellant if we want to make him a stress healer. Though I don't think you need to. I think Crusader's just fine on his own. Ashen Distillation, this could be something else. This could be a Witch's Vial, which is a low-level class trinket that's plus 15% stun chance, or a Dazzling Charm, or something utility like Survival Guide, though that lowers speed, so I probably wouldn't use it. Actually, I would consider giving her a Speed Stone at that point, because I think Speed Stone, it's common, right? So +1 speed, if you find that pretty nice. Snake Oil offsets Vial pretty well. I would just try and avoid lowering her speed with stuff like Survival Guide, but otherwise, if you can afford it, Ashen Distillation isn't too expensive for a crystal trinket, and 20 dodge is very helpful to her because her defenses are pretty lacking, and 20 dodge makes her a bit more survivable, and then 25% blight skill is awesome. This helps you stick blights on even the most blight resistant enemies. I think the top end of blight resist caps out at about 140. I can't think of something that's over that, so there might be one. Obviously there's like 240s and stuff, I'm not counting those. So this is pretty good to help her stick blights once you're done stunning stuff. And the Healing Recede for medicinal herbs is a nice effect because herbs aren't commonly burned through quickly in a dungeon, unless you're in the Cove or something like that. So it's nice, and you should find that the uptime on this is pretty common, or I should say, it goes for a while. Crusader is our primary support. He's really just here to, like, heal or stress heal and stun, but he can do damage if he has to. So we have Smite. This is replaceable with, I think, Battle Heal, but there are times where it's like, man, I really wish I had Smite, and there are times where it's like, I really wish I had Battle Heal. So I think Smite's more consistent because this team is really good at killing backline, so once you get down to the front line, having just a big hit alongside Bounty Hunter's big hit is just nice to have, so Smite's cool. Stunning Blow is pretty much what Crusader's hitting for most of the battle, just because if he's not stress healing, he's rotating this stun across the front two units, so you just stun the first person, and then you stun the second person, then you stun the first person, and then you're probably stress healing after that, so those are his turns usually. And it's just a good move. I like Stunning Blow quite a bit. Then we have Holy Lance, which if Crusader gets moved out of position, then this helps him fix it. It's never bad to have Holy Lance. Like, you can go an entire dungeon without pressing it, and it's fine because his other moves are such high value. And there are times where if you get surprised at full torch, you'll be happy that you had Holy Lance. So trust me, it is a great move, and it's usually a good one to have on Crusader at pretty much all times, unless you know you're specifically going into a boss that isn't going to move you. Inspiring Cry is just a good move. It gives you an extra torch, which saves you money if you really want to min-max it. It gives you stress heal, which PD will probably appreciate this. It gives you a flat amount of healing to get people off Death's Door. You know, just a bunch of value packed into one move. Trinkets, we're going to use Paralyzer's Crest because having consistent stuns on Stunning Blow at 140 is kind of low, so being able to get that to 160 is fantastic. -2 dodge does not exist to Crusader. Like, it is no noticeable difference at all in terms of performance, so I think this is a very good item to have. The Ancestor Scroll can be Signed Conscription or some other utility trinket or Commander's Orders, some other form of like healing output. This is a pretty flexible spot, but I think Scroll is really good on Crusader because he makes use of both stats. So if you can find this, because you can find it early, so if you can find it early, then it's good to put on him. Flagellant is going to rock Punish and Rain of Sorrows. Punish is just there to hit on turns 3 and 4 and 5 if you don't need to heal. Rain of Sorrows, this is your turn 1 and 2, and that's just because the whole name of this team is Backline Cleaving. So this is part of that cleave. So between Plague Grenade and this, if you can stick both damage over time types, they're already taking 11 a turn just from this, And then Caltrops should give them an extra 1 or 2 points. I can't remember if it calculates per effect. So like, does it count the blights and then the bleed and then add it together? Or does it just consider both of them as one lump sum number? In that case, actually, I still think it's +2. So I think it should still be +2 damage if you have both of these, if you have the bleed and the blight together. So that's really nice. So you get +13 damage on someone per turn just by sticking damage over time. Really awesome stuff. Plus it's melee, so it synergizes with the surgical gloves and other melee trinkets. Exsanguinate is one of those moves that like, you won't equip it sometimes, and then you just wish you had it because you'll have like 6 times in a dungeon where you could have just hit it and it would have been great. And there are times where you don't hit it, but I think Exsang is just too good to pass up anymore. So I do like having it. Plus, like I was saying before, this team is really good at cleaving down the back line. And then the front line, it has some damage for it, but it's nice to have something as high value as Exsanguinate to close out fights. Reclaim is here so Flagellant has something to do on turns like 3, 4, and 5. It's a great heal effect. It means that Crusader doesn't have to pack battle heal. It could be Redeem if you really want to, but I think Exsanguinate and Reclaim cover enough bases. And you also have the optionality with Reclaim to let Flagellant bleed down into Exsanguinate range, or you could run Medicine on Plague Doctor to cure it, or you can run some bleed resist to block it, but I don't think you need to. So I think Reclaim with its choice, right, like its optionality, is really nice to have. And Reclaim is a move that I really appreciate the more I use it. And it's also another move that the more I talk about it and the more videos I make and stuff, it's one of those things that people leave in the comments or they type in Twitch chat. They say, I didn't like Reclaim that much. You kept talking about it. I tried it. I like it a lot. So I think if you haven't tried Reclaim, definitely give it a try. And I'm trying to make sure this does not become another Flagellant guide, which I think someone said I did to the Man-at-Arms video, so I'm trying to avoid that, so I'm going to shut up right now about these skills. With the Trinkets, I like to make sure that I can stick my bleeds, even though Flagellant does have some pretty good accuracy and bleed chance and all that, plus he has the debuff. I think the debuffs are a little unreliable in most cases, so I'd rather just have consistency. So I take the Bleed Amulet, and it's good enough. So it blocks other bleeds from enemies, which are more common than blights, though if you're in the Warrens, this opens you up to the worms that leave blights on you, so there's that. Otherwise, pretty good, pretty easy to get Bleed Amulet early on as well. The surgical gloves, the surgical gloves are amazing for Flagellant just because all of his stuff is melee. So Reign of Sorrows is also melee, which I don't think I remembered, but then Punish and Exsang are also melee, which means you just get a ton of value, and the 8 crit is monstrous. If you stick a crit Exsang, good things happen. Crit Reign of Sorrows, good things happen. Crit Punish, good things happen. So if you can get these, they feel like they are kind of rare, but the gloves are great on a lot of characters, so finding one in a playthrough should be a top priority. And if you're on this team, give them to Flagellant. As I said before, the nice part of this team is how fast it is. So it has some really good backline destructive ability. So with Reign of Sorrows, you're already doing 5 points to 2 people, and then you have Caltrops, which you can put on the first target in the backline, probably the faster one, and then if no one else is stealth, then on turn 2 you put Caltrops on the other target, and then PD on turn 1 uses Blinding Gas, turn 2 Plague Grenade, and like I said, Flagellant on turn 1 and 2 is Reign of Sorrows both times. So you already have, if you're not even counting the Caltrops damage, you have 5 from the first tick on Reign of Sorrows, 10 from the second, just because of like the ramp ability. Then you have 16 from the 2 ticks, like by turn 2 on everyone because of Plague Grenade. And then you start counting in the Caltrops damage. So if you can stick it on one person, they're up to 20 damage. And then obviously you get the 20% boost. And if you stick Caltrops on the other person, that's another 20%. So that should be, depending on how the math comes out, it should be an extra 3 or 4. So on turn 2, at the end of turn 2, you are reliably doing like 23 or 24 points of damage to the backline. That's going to take down most backline enemies, or at least set them up to be killed at like the start of turn 3, which means if PD is fast enough with like Quick Draw or Luminous or some other speed quirk, then sticking all of this together means that the backline enemies only get like 1 turn, or sometimes 0, depending on what happens. And that's powerful, especially if you wanted to do something like with PD, you could stack stun trinkets, so you could double stun some of the lower stun resist enemies. There's just a lot of flexibility in this team, and it can safely take down backline enemies, and then it has enough recovery potential that even the 1 or 2 attacks they may get off just don't matter at all. Even though this is the Bounty Hunter guide, he isn't really the star of this team. He's just kind of there to really emphasize how much backline damage you're doing with caltrops. So he's still fun. He's still important to this team. But it's not like the Mark team and stuff where Bounty Hunter just, blows stuff up for 65. It's really just Bounty Hunter hits caltrops on something, hits caltrops on something else. Sometimes he stuns. And then once you're in like turn 4 or 5, he just hits finish him, does a bunch of damage. Alright, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Next up is going to be the Antiquarian, and I will admit that I am not that good with the character, so we are having special guest Thick Veiny Sausage, who is going to be helping us with that guide. He's primarily writing pretty much all of it, and I'm just facilitating the video making experience, so I'm looking forward to that and working with him, so I hope y'all enjoy it and check it out. In the meantime, follow on Twitch, join Discord, all that awesome stuff. Let me know what you're thinking down below. Post your Bounty Hunter teams. There's some cool tips that I have missed because obviously there's just too much to talk about in this short amount of time. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.